So now you can understand blockchain provides a lot of benefits, especially from the transparency point of view, by having the immutability, provenance, and decentralization. However, blockchain networks can be divided into certain types. So now I'm going to discuss what types of blockchain network we can have. The famous one, or you can say the birth of the blockchain, is by a public blockchain network. Of course, Bitcoin was a public blockchain network, which means that you and I can be similar, can access the data as you can access the data. So we all are same in this one. So there is no centralized authority who can dictate us, who can ask us to shut down and so on. So it's something similar. So public blockchain network, you can say maybe Ethereum or all the those blockchain network which are based on communities. So that's how so this is what a public blockchain network is. Now there is something called a private blockchain network. Now private blockchain network doesn't need cryptocurrency, because now we are only talking about a network, we are not talking about an application. So just imagine, private blockchain network can be controlled by one authority because they wanted to control their data, they wanted to possess this data and make sure there must be an transparency, but within that particular department or within organization and so on. So no public access will be allowed in this one. So this private blockchain network is something totally different from the public blockchain network, because public blockchain network, the only similarity between them is the way they are chaining the data, or you can say the DLT part, the distributed ledger part they are containing. Hybrid network is something like controlled by one authority with permissionless access or processes for the public. For example, this can provide a company can build a blockchain network, but it can provide the access to the public so that the public can view their services, or maybe some sort of query they can do that on their system. So this is where hybrid network comes in. Now there is another network which we call consortium network, which is also can be, you can say, like a permission based network, which means that different types of private entities, they work together, they create a consortium, like a group of these entities, they create this network, and only these group of entities can access the data between each other. So that way, whatever the data they are exchanging between each other will remain under them. There is no public accessibility. Now if you extend this concept to if let's say there is a blockchain network between these entities, like private entities, they are exchanging some sort of data, but at the same time they wanted to share some of the data to the public, or they wanted to get some of the data from the public. So in this case there is a hybrid consortium network comes in. So here you can see the control by a group of isolated private entities by giving some permissionless access to the public. So, but some, it means not all. So these are the few blockchain network. Now these blockchain network have their own different application. Now imagine how many applications you can create. And when we talk about public blockchain network, it's totally different. When we talk about hybrid network, it's totally different. So you have to think about the fusion, you have to think about non-fusion, and so on. So for example, let's go with the public blockchain network. Now type of blockchain network application from the public perspective, you can see cryptocurrencies, DeFi application. Now this is 100% decentralized network. That's why I'm talking about Web 3.0, which means that it's total. I'm talking about a decentralized read and write access and so on. So there is no infrastructure cost in this one, because you just need to build your own application, and then you have to connect with the blockchain network. You don't need a server to run anything, unless you required something on your maybe you are processing something, then that is a different story. But if you are writing a decentralized application, then of course you don't need any server. So again, it It is based on your requirement, what type of requirement you are talking about. So from my perspective, we are talking about a decentralized application, which means that the only data we are putting is on the blockchain network, or maybe on the IPFS, which is an interplanetary file system. So here you can see read and write access can be given to the people. Everyone can access it. So there is no problem. You can write, I can read, you can read. So Bitcoin or Ethereum network are same public blockchain network applications. In the private blockchain network, you can think about, imagine a military. Now military can have few departments who can exchange data between each other, and they maybe a confidential facilities, private departments, they can exchange some sort of data. They wanted to make sure there is auditability and there is a traceability available which cannot be tampered. If there are papers, of course papers can be tampered. If there is a database, it can be tampered, it can be hackable. But when we talk about a blockchain network which has a chain of data, then of course it's more it's very hard for someone to tamper anything. The confidential data, which is only privately used by any single organization, in this case a private blockchain network is something feasible. So it required, of course, of infrastructure cost, but not too much, because it's a single entity we are talking about. So single entity may have a single infrastructure cost and doesn't require much. It is, of course, read and write access should be restricted, which means that only certain people or within the organization can access this data. When we talk about hybrid network, which is a cross between the public and private, you can say maybe a single universities who wanted to share some of their documentation or maybe the verification proof on the public blockchain network, so the person can view this data. However, the data is coming from the private access, from the universities and so on, or maybe those applications which are more like into a private organization, but they wanted to establish something into crypto as well. So this is where hybrid blockchain network can come in. It's a cross between two, or maybe operatable between these two, and so on. Bidding system is can be one of the example as well, can come inside the hybrid system, where read is available to the public, while some part of the write access and some part is available, while some part is restricted to write, which means that some part will only be written by the organization who created this hybrid network. Then we have a consortium network where banks can have. Now here when we talk about consortium, then of course there will be maybe multiple banks. They are working together. They are creating maybe some sort of a network between each other to verify some sort of data, maybe letters, maybe checks, maybe letter of guarantee, letter of evidence, and so on. Private supply chain, where only different organizations can view their supply chain related process and data and trace their data information. Here infrastructure cost is of course available, which means that you have to pay a lot of money in order to establish this entire system. This is more like a restricted version. However, it is permission to those entities who wanted to read and write. Then of course it is more like a democratic system between these entire group. The last one is hybrid consortium network, which can be used like a universities network, banks or government, some public access and supply chain, voting system. It is restricted write and unrestricted read is available, which means that restricted write is available to the public. However, it is unrestricted to read some part. So this is these are the different flavors of the blockchain network. When you are designing your blockchain application, you have to think about which blockchain network you have to choose before choosing any blockchain network. And when you decide that okay, this type of application is required, then you have to choose the technology in this case.